Hello, my name is Zachary, and I'm interested in art appreciation. Today, I want to talk about word associations, and that's going to be highly relevant to art, appreciating art, analyzing art. We're just going to learn about it in the context of art. It'll be making a lot of sense as we go along. This is mostly stuff from Roman Jakobson. It might be Jakobson. I don't know. We're going to learn about his ideas of the differences between a metaphor and a metonymy. Metaphor and metonymy are both two types of word association. Metaphor is something that implies a similar and replaceable idea, while metonym, when a metonymy, metonym, metonymy, same thing. Metonym implies a continuation of an idea into another idea. So each type of words, each of these two word associations have two steps. First, you need a supply of candidate words, and then you need a particular function. So with a metaphor, the supply of candidate words is going to be similar words to the original. Similar as in they are replaceable. So the function is that replacement. So if we have the word macaroni, and we're thinking of a metaphor, we would have candidates of other types of pasta, like spaghetti or penne or whatever, rigatoni. These are metaphors, and if you replace any of those in whatever sentence or utterance you're using, not just listing all of the candidate words, you actually replace the word, that would be a metaphor. With a metonymy, the supply of candidate words are a chain of words that would naturally flow, either coming before or coming after the original word. So if we have the word macaroni, a metonymy would be a continuation of that to something like macaroni and cheese. Does that make sense? So it's a difference between a continuation and a replacement. Those are two types of word associations. And those are both extremely basic forms that I just gave you. Macaroni being replaced with spaghetti, being a basic form of a metaphor, and macaroni being extended to macaroni and cheese is a very basic metonymy. And these are both distinct ways that the human mind relates words together. And they can be, interestingly enough, this is something that Roman Jakobson talks about, they can be independently improved or they can be independently broken or damaged. They can be developed by cultural patterns, personality. Sometimes they can be damaged by just brain development or damages. This is really what the paper that he wrote is all about. People who have aphasia, type of brain damage, and they can't make certain types of word associations. They either can't make any metaphoric word associations or they can't make any metonymic word associations. So Roman Jakobson, he thinks that all language and all symbolic thinking are forms of either metaphor or metonymy. And it goes way beyond just the simple breakdown of, a single word being extended or a single word being replaced into more broader concepts like parts of a work of art being replaced or themes in a work of art being extended, that type of thing. So to begin to account for all different types of symbolism and themes in works of art, the metaphor and metonymy has to go way beyond this basic form into much larger concepts. So you should be pretty familiar with metaphors. I mean, this is a very common thing. You know what a metaphor is. So I'll give a very simple example. This is a koan. It's just like koans, okay? So I'm going to talk a little bit about koans. I like koans. There's a koan that says, when you meet the Buddha, kill him. When you meet the patriarchs, you kill them. And this is excerpt from Muman Khan, collection of Zen Buddhist stories. The basic reading, this is the concept, it replaces this sentiment. There's a particular sentiment, which is, if you feel that you understand Zen, then you are mistaken and you have ruined the message. So because the sentiment of the original phrase, which is, if you meet the Buddha, kill the Buddha, can be replaced by this sentiment of the other phrase, if you understand Zen, then you've misunderstood. There you go. Those are replaceable. it's a metaphor for each other. Metonymies are common, also very common. They're even more common than metaphors, but they are they're not usually pointed out or recognized. I don't know if people talk about this in school. I don't remember learning about this in class. I think they're more common than metaphors. But a metonymy is fundamentally just a continuation of a phrase. So pretty much all narratives are consisting of continuations, things that continue. So the interest comes when it's used as a special rhetorical device, right? This commonly done for adding realism in works of art to just sort of overly emphasize the implications of something, like the realistic implications of something, and that it's like world building, right? That brings realism into a story. So you might want to add a lot of detail that doesn't seem relevant. There's a movie called Rififi. I really love this movie from the 50s. And there's a very long silent heist scene, like they're bank robbers. It's almost 30 minutes. I think it's real time. There's no dialogue at all. And it could be, you could condense it into like 5 minutes. You really could just edit it to be a really short sequence, and it will get all of the relevant plot devices, like all of the relevant plot details would be there. But the extension of it to show all of the tiny, minute details, all of the micro interactions between the people who are doing the heist, to show all that detail adds this level of realism. Something similar apparently in the book, The Game of Thrones. I've heard people talk about this before, though I've never read the book. I hear in the book that there's sort of excessive detail about food. So whenever people sit down and eat, they prepare food, there might be some things that are plot relevant to the food, like the choices of the food or why they're eating the food or how they're eating it, but they go into excruciating detail about all of the prepared food and how people are eating it and so on, which it could be easily cut and keep all of the plot relevant information. But this is more about having this sort of realistic thing. It's thematically relevant, not plot relevant. So in this rhetorical device of having a metonymy is essentially adding unnecessary from the perspective of the plot, unnecessary detail, but all the detail do naturally flow from the other details of the plot that are relevant. Again, world building. Beyond the most simple metaphors and metonymies, we must account for two additional possibilities. Again, this is something that Roman Jakobson calls poetic language. And this is what happens when you have a metaphoric candidate word with a metonymic function. You know, I really should have thought to myself how I was going to say that word before I started this video. Metonymic? I don't know. Metonymic? I'm not sure. Okay, and the opposite thing is if you have a metonymic, I don't know. If you have a metonymic candidate word and you use it with a metaphoric function. I'm going to give some examples to make sure that is understood. So remember, when you have a metaphor, you have a list of words that you could replace, and then you replace it. And then with the metonymy, you have a word, and then you have a list of things that could continue, and then you choose the one to continue. That's the candidate words and then the function. Those are two separate parts. And those can be switched. So in this episode, there's an episode of South Park called The Douche and the Danish. And Mr. Garrison becomes the president of the United States. And Cartman also gets himself a girlfriend. In this episode, the behavior from Mr. Garrison towards the country is very similar to the behavior between Cartman and his girlfriend. And they're set up as metaphors for each other. They could be replaced for one another. You could just have an entire episode about Cartman and his girlfriend, and then that would be, it would be obvious that they're talking about the United States, like they're talking about the country. Or you could have an episode just about Trump, Mr. Garrison, in the White House, and that would be very obvious that they're talking about an abusive relationship. So they're metaphors of each other. But in this episode, they parallel each other. They're both being shown, and they're being shown side by side. And almost as if the consequences of one directly lead to the other. So you might see Mr. Garrison yelling at the people at the White House, and then it cuts to Cartman and Heidi, his girlfriend, looking upset because it presumably they just yelled at each other, right? So you have this metaphor that is being used as a metonymy. Okay, so that's the example of the metaphor being used with a function of a metonymy. There's another way, and a movie I really like is called To Live or Ikiru from 1952 by Akira Kurosawa. Great, great, great movie. There's a guy who discovers that he has some form of cancer. I think it's pancreatic cancer. And he believes that he's wasted his entire life working in some bureaucracy, government bureaucracy. We watch him in this fruitless journey of learning how to live. He goes gambling, he goes drinking, he dances with women, until at some point he has an idea. And at this point where he has this idea for doing something, we don't know what it is, he has an idea to do something. There is, unrelated to his having this idea, he's in public. Some other party, like another group of people, unrelated to him, start singing happy birthday. Okay, that's a cool metaphor already. We don't want to get too much into detail about that. That's not the important part. What's important is right after that, the movie cuts, and then we start to see his funeral. At this funeral, we see the man, his son, is surprised there because his son is there, and his son sees a lot of other people crying, and it's not expected to him. He would have expected that the funeral would be empty because he didn't know his dad had any friends. And in fact, before, when we were watching the movie, when we were watching the dad go around, he didn't have any friends. It's not like he knew a lot of people. He was just doing a lot of random things. So by seeing all the people crying, we assume that the father figured out some way to live, but it was skipped. Like it's cut out of the entire movie. We never see his life, but we only see the impact of his life. So if you have a life and you have an impact of the life, the impact of living your life is an extension. It's a continuation, right? And if you were to take the continuation and replace it with the life, right? You have a life as the main concept, and then the continuation of the life, or the implications of that life, is the continuation. If you take the implications of living the life and replace it with the life itself, that is using a metonymy as a metaphor. So the impact of his life has replaced the actual showing of his life. Anyway, great movie. I really liked it. Just a great movie. Great movie. I had nothing to say more about that. Amazing movie. You should watch it. It's fantastic. I love that movie. Okay, so while we have these distinctions of metaphor and metonymy, and then we have these hybrids, you can see that you can create unique ways of analyzing a narrative work of art. The simple notion of word associations can be used to view art more clearly. So what do you think? Do you find yourself as a more of a metaphorical person, a more metonical person? If I say macaroni, is your first thought spaghetti, or is your first thought and cheese?